everybody, welcome to Fruitful Trees. And one of the things that's so dear to my heart is living waste-free, or doing my best to reduce the amount of waste as much as possible, but to reuse what other people call waste in my garden. I do this on many different levels. I recycle my food and I put it in compost, and I reuse that soil for my garden and my trees. I even recycle my manure and I use that for my trees. Just trying to have as little garbage as possible, but also to use as much as possible, or reuse as much as possible for my garden. As you can see there, I have some compost bins, and I just am in the process of putting in my garden for this year, and I used all of the soil actually in my garden beds that I've been composting all year. So I compost my soil, my food scraps, my waste, paper, just about everything I can. I have very little garbage. I actually missed the garbage pickup today, but it doesn't matter because I don't even get a full can in some weeks of the garbage. But I love composting. I think it's really important, and there's many different methods and types of ways to compost. In my garden bins over there that I showed you, I do worm composting. And that is going to produce the best soil for growing greens and things like this. Well, today on the show we have a lady who is fulfilling two of my passions: composting with worms and also helping people to live waste-free, or with as little waste as possible. But something sad happened to her, where the city or the state is trying to stop her from doing this wonderful thing and trying to shut down a business for that. So she needs help with that. So I wanted her to come on the show today and explain all about composting. And if you want to grow great looking trees and you also want to have a great looking garden, learn about composting. It just is absolutely amazing how great the food grows when you have composted soil and you do it the right way. So Melissa's going to come on and talk to here today about composting, and she's also going to talk about the dilemma she's in helping people with this great passion. This video is not like my normal videos where I'm just going around and showing people fruit trees. She does have some fruit trees that I will show you at the end of what she's growing in her house, but the main part of this video is about the composting and to help her with the dilemma she's in, and to let everybody know about composting, to look more into it. It's such an important thing. I'm going to put all the links below for Melissa's website, her GoFundMe page, and all that information. So everybody check it out. Here it goes. Hello everybody, this is Paul with Fruitful Trees, and we're here with Melissa today in Loxahatchee, Florida. This is going to be different than my normal video because we're talking about a subject that's very important, and Melissa's under a situation with the local government, and she can use your help. So please watch this video if you're interested in growing trees. I'm big into composting. I love to grow fruit trees and using my compost and gardens and so on. And Melissa is the worm lady, and we're going to interview her now. So I'm going to put all the contact information below that she discusses and all the links. Please watch this video and share it with other people. Here we go. All right, everybody, here we are with the Worm Queen. This is Melissa, and there it is, Worm Queen. Melissa, why do they call you the Worm Queen?
Well, I, for 8 years, have been collecting trash and then feeding it to worms to make worm castings. The worms thought I did such a good job that they made me their queen.
So when you say worm castings, I see a bunch of 5-gallon buckets behind you here, or 4-gallon or whatever they are. But what do you mean worm castings, and why do you do this? For composting, correct?
Yes. So my goal was to reduce food waste being sent to the incinerator and instead turn it into compost and worm castings, and then help teach people how to use all natural products in their home gardens. So that's what I've been doing with my pickup service for the last 5 years. I had about 100 to 200 customers that subscribed to a regular pickup service. I taught them how to sort their compostable trash into these buckets for me. And then on a regular pickup schedule, I would come grab their bucket full of goodies for the worms, bring it back to my place to feed the worms, and leave them a clean, empty bucket for them to fill back up for me.
So pretty much you had a business composting people's food scraps, and the worms would convert it into soil,
Yes.
And how long would it take? And what did you didn't, this is what you picked up the food scraps in, but did you convert them in here as well?
No, I did like a traditional thermophilic kind of compost pile. And then I would take some of that dirt and mix it with fresh food scraps and shredded paper and bed the worms with it. Then when my worm population got to be too much, I would take worms out of my breeder systems and just throw them into the compost piles to let them finish working the compost down.
Okay. Do you still have the compost pile, or you're done with the compost piles at the moment?
So I have some trench composting going on right here. This is how we built most of the garden beds on the property. All we do is take the organic waste and dump it right out, right onto the ground, right on top of the grass, no prepping the land at all. We put cardboard right on top of it and then a nice thick layer of mulch, and we let it go ahead and break down naturally. Now, there's probably about like an 8-inch to 1 foot buffer zone around the trees where there's no raw scraps, but everywhere else underneath this pile of mulch, and like you can see, thanks to some of the chickens helping the compost process out, we just have food scraps that are slowly breaking down and helping build the soil right here. As the food breaks down, it kills the grass, it mixes with the cardboard and mulch, and it creates this beautiful fluffy layer of topsoil, and we can go ahead and start digging and planting right into it after about 6 weeks.
6 weeks, wow. So pretty much, so you get the food scraps from the bucket, you put them on the ground, and then you put the worms on top of it.
Yeah, I add the worms in later, because as the food scraps break down, it releases heat, and the worms don't like temperatures too high. So it takes about a week or so for that little heating and off-gassing process to happen. Then it's safe to go ahead and add some worms into this. And the worms really do all of the hard work for me.
Now, is it okay at that point to put plants in the ground? Will it burn the plants, or do you have to wait? Or can you put can you have a plant and just put the food scraps around it?
I find that it depends on the kind of plant. If I'm working with trees or stuff that has more of a hardwood trunk to it, that's a little bit older and not young, like direct seeding in this doesn't work. But if I were to dig out a hole and plant like a sapling into it, I should be fine. Some of the herbaceous stuff is a little more sensitive. The fast-growing vegetable plants don't really like this method of composting, and I'd have to wait at least 4 to 6 weeks before I started planting something like that for the brunt of this stuff to be broken down. But the hardwood stuff that I have in here, the trees and bushes, all love it.
What kind of tree is that?
This is a fiddlewood tree. It's a Florida native tree, and the host for, I think, 2 different butterflies, or a butterfly and a moth here in.
So is this the way you do all your piles, or did you have a traditional compost bin or pile where you composted everything and let that sit and turn into soil?
So I also had a couple big compost piles. I still have my big giant pile of mulch, which we can go take a look at.
Sure.
I use that for all the composting that I do around here. I use palm tree mulch that's been shredded by a tree trimmer and dropped off at my property. And I get a big batch of like 30 yards at a time. And I use that to mix with all my food scraps to create a proper compost recipe, which is a minimum of 50% browns, which I use the wood chips for, and 50% greens, which is what all this food waste coming in was used for.
So when you're feeding the worms, do you need to have the browns in there, or can it be just the greens?
You absolutely need the browns. They're detrimental to help create a fluffy substrate for the worms to live in. We call it bedding, just like hamster bedding or reptile bedding. Worms need bedding too. They live underground, so something to help replicate their natural ecosystem. They only burrow about 18 inches deep, so ensuring that I have the right kind of depth for them to work this material over to without escaping into the regular ground where the soil isn't as healthy for them to survive in is detrimental. That's why this is kind of mounded upwards instead of just spread flat straight across the ground for it to break down naturally. I need some depth for the worms to exist in. Just the green scraps, as they break down, release too many acids, waters, and heat. So the browns are to help absorb and buffer that reaction out and create a balance in the system. In traditional composting, you want that heating process to happen because it's very important in order to degrade the material in your compost pile. But in worm composting, you want to avoid that process from ever happening. So you end up using a lot more browns than greens in a worm compost system, almost to the point where a lot of times I'll do a worm feeding and I would say it's a 10% greens to 90% browns ratio to help mitigate that heating response.
Well, we know the greens are the food scraps, but what would browns be, like cardboard and paper bags?
Yeah, I use a lot of shredded office paper.
So typical white
Yeah,
printing
absolutely.
paper is, even though it's white, it's considered a brown. Because
Yeah, the only thing that I really noticed in using the bleached paper is my castings come out more of a light brown or grayish color sometimes than a dark rich brown. But in application and testing, they seem to be the same quality of castings despite the color.
Okay, interesting. So people can use printed paper, or now if you get a box that has like writing on it and stuff, do the dyes in the cardboard harm the pile at all? Do you know?
So in my experience, I haven't had any sort of contamination from things like dyes or even heavy metals show up in my composting. But worms are this incredible little miracle of nature, and they tend to eat like the most toxic stuff and filter it out in their metabolism and poop out like the best soil ever. So I don't worry too much about the dyes and other things because I know that the worms have this capability and make a very safe, stable product.
Some people will bury like or use horse manure and so on. If you put like horse manure in your compost pile, is that considered a brown or a green?
So horse manure tends to break down hot, which would consider it more of a green. But if you leave your manure out and let that heating process happen for a couple weeks before you then use it, you could turn it into a brown.
So the heats keep the food scraps, and the greens produce the heat, and browns produce the cooling effect, so to say, or the balancing out of it for the worms?
Yeah, the browns help create like porosity so you can get some good airflow because you need oxygen for this breakdown reaction to happen. It's almost like a convection oven where the heat gets sucked up and released through the top of it, and it kind of breathes in air around the sides of it. That's why it's better to have an open compost pile like this than to use one of those plastic composting bins that you can buy from a multitude of different companies. They tend to trap too much moisture and not let good airflow through, especially here in Florida where it's so humid and our air is so wet. Those plastic compost bins can actually be counterintuitive to the composting process because they block so much of that airflow as part of the natural process. But the browns also help absorb the stuff the greens release as it breaks down.
Now that's if you're using worms, right? If you're using the plastic bins without the worms, then it's okay? Or you're talking about the worm situation, or in all situations of plastic bins?
Actually, in all situations. With the worms, the secret is to not add so many greens that there's enough fuel to cause that heating process. And the secret with regular composting is to add enough greens so there's enough fuel for that heating process to happen.
Sure, so you got to find the right balance.
Exactly.
So from my experience, Melissa, with using the bins, if you put all greens in there and all greens in there and you put the worms in there, you come back in a couple of weeks and nothing's in there.
Nothing. You'll have a sludgy, smelly, probably filled with black soldier fly larvae, which may not be a bad thing depending on what you're trying to do, mess.
But you could put a whole watermelon in there and it's gone, but it doesn't turn into soil. It's literally just goes down, so you're not really...
It just breaks down and into... Well, it depends on what kind of microbes you have present that are actually causing that breakdown process to happen. Composting is a microbe farming game. You want to create the right conditions for a microbial population explosion to happen. And all those good bacteria and fungus eat everything up and help transfer it into soil really quickly. when you're worm farming, you want to farm microbes for the worms to then eat. So causing too many microbes to be born at once by adding too much food is a good way to throw off the balance of the worm composting system, but a great way to jumpstart the composting process in a traditional compost pile.
Got you. So in a case like this without the worms and you're just putting the food scraps down and maybe covering it with some mulch, is there a big benefit to that, or the worms just change the whole situation?
There's a huge benefit to doing this. It really helps build good topsoil and releases a lot of immediately available nutrition into the soil around the plants that I'm trying to grow. But adding the worms to it really is like pouring gasoline on a fire. They help aerate the soil and really work the material into the ground. The same way the chickens do, actually. I'll let the chickens out and they'll come scratch up the pile, and then I'll rake it all back up into a pile, having them turned it for me. But the worms really help process this into a much nicer soil product than just traditional composting makes.
And how often do you need to turn it when it's like this, or do you not, since it's so spread out?
So the way that I do this method of composting, I do not turn my pile ever. When I have a regular compost pile, like my big mulch pile, that does have to be turned every couple of weeks to every other month in order to add fresh air into the system and restart that composting process. So when I was collecting scraps on a regular basis, I did have a pile that I would feed every week, and then every other month I would turn it over, basically take the top of it and make that the bottom, and get the bottom onto the top, add some fresh scraps to it, and let the compost process continue to happen.
Sure. Can you use any worms, or is there a particular type of worm you use for this?
So that's a great question, because a lot of people think that we have a native worm here in Florida, and we do not have a native worm. There are no earthworms that are native to this area. We have an invasive species called Adriatic jumping worms, and they are actually not a good thing to have in your garden. They're a good sign that you're building up your soil by breaking down organic matter, because they love to eat decomposing browns like mulches, cardboard, paper. However, they tend to lock that nutrition up into an unavailable soil product that actually can discourage growth in your plants instead of helping feed your plants available nutrition like the worms I work with do.
So what worms do you work with, and do you recommend for people to use?
So I use 2 species of worms in my composting. I use red wigglers and African night crawlers. African night crawlers are a truly tropical worm. They will withstand temperatures really up to almost 100 degrees. The red wigglers at about 90 degrees start to get upset and may try to flee the area that they're in, escape to better conditions. However, the red wigglers have much better little personalities to them and are much easier to keep domestically. The African night crawlers are very adventurous and curious. They constantly escape out of their systems, and they don't like to be stressed out or interacted with. So even though they help carry me through the hottest time of the year because they withstand higher temperatures, the red wigglers don't really eat much over the summertime. It's just trying to keep them alive. I still prefer working with the red wigglers because they're very amorous and friendly. They like to live in big hordes. They're very social and they interact with each other. They mate and breed a lot. They can double their population every month if you have them under the right conditions. And in general, I just found that working with them was much easier than working with the African night crawlers.
But here in South Florida, it's all summer long. It's over 90 degrees. So
it's brutal, but
can you use them in the summertime?
Yeah, what's really cool is soil has like a thermal mass to it where it can actually retain cooler temperatures than the ambient air around it. So if you dig into your soil, especially if it's rich in organic matter and not just that sugar sand that we have here, you'll notice about 4 to 6 inches in, the soil's much cooler than the air temperature.
Yeah, but if you're using a lot of greens, then it's going to heat the soil. So would that kill the red wigglers?
Precisely. It can. It more likely will cause them to escape, to run away from the hot conditions. But it can also cause something called protein poisoning, which is when there's too many greens and they start to release too many nitrogen compounds, and it actually acidifies the system. Worms are 90% water and they breathe through their skin. So if you shift the pH of your compost pile too much and there's worms in it, then the worm's internal pH will shift too, and that causes a breakdown in their bodies called protein poisoning. So over the summer, I tend to not feed at all or only feed about once a month to try and mitigate any of that excessive heat generation that the breakdown process causes.
And again, you could do all this without worms. Worms, if you do under the right conditions, just make the process better, correct?
Yeah, the reason that I got into worms is because I only had so much space to work with. And compost is worth about 50 cents a pound, and worm castings are worth about $10 a pound. So it made more sense to try to make a more valuable product with the smaller space I had than to make a less valuable product and use up more of the space that I had.
And just same, not much more work as long as you have the worms.
No, in my opinion, it's a little less work using the worms because I don't have to do things like turn my pile every other month, which I would have to do if I was just doing traditional composting. I can get away with being a lazy gardener and let the worms do most of the hard work for me.
And so I know the red wiggler worms, I once got them at a fishing store. I mean, do you get them at a special place or do you just go to your local fishing store?
So you can just pick them up at a fishing store, but if you want the best bang for your buck, you're gonna wanna import them. There are a couple worm farms in Florida that sells worms online. I've bought from them and don't recommend using them personally. My favorite place to import worms from is The Worm Farm. They're based out of California, and they've been in the industry for like, I think over 40 or 50 years. And they're a giant multi-acre composting and worm farm facility that I've done business with for the last, I think, 5 or 6 years now.
Now, do they deal only with commercial people, or can like an average person that just wants to do backyard composting order from them a small amount of worms?
So you can order 1 pound increments of worms. 1 pound of worms is about 1,000 worms. It's a great place to start for an at-home composting system. The general rule of an active worm farming system is you can fit about 1,000 worms per 1 square foot of space, as long as the conditions are correct for them. The pH is balanced, there's good moisture, and there's food available.
Is it the more worms the better, or not necessarily? So how many worms would you throw in a pile like this? Do you try to get as much as possible, or does it make a difference?
I have breeder trays that usually at full capacity have about 500 to 1,000 worms in them, and I'll throw a whole breeder tray right into here with about 1,000 worms and let them kind of figure it out. I could put a lot more into a pile like this, but I want to focus my population on constantly upbreeding. So I try not to overdo it when I apply worms to this scenario because I don't get them back.
Can you put too many?
You can reach a point where there's too many worms in a composting system and they will self-regulate their population and start to die off a little bit. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can slow down the process because they'll stop eating in order to conserve whatever resources are left. And some of them will migrate away or die off as that happens. I find the best thing to do is every month or every other month, I just take half of one of my worm systems and start a whole new worm system with it. And that's how I bred up my numbers from 1,000 worms to like 100,000 worms.
So if somebody just comes and throws their food scraps here and like 10 worms here, is that just like way too little?
That probably won't make a huge difference.
But okay, go ahead, finish.
Now, if you took 10 worms and you had a small compost system where you could control the temperature and saturation, there's a good chance you could breed those 10 worms into 1,000 worms in 6 months to a year. But in more of a natural system like this, where it's going to be subjected to things like rain and predators and just the elements, you're unlikely to get that sort of reaction in this sort of system.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you. Okay, so what kind of food scraps are people given? Is it just fruits and vegetables, or do people put animals in there, like the chicken they eat and throw the bones in there? Like, what kind of food scraps do you work with, and does everyone need to work the same way you work, or what do you suggest?
So I have worked with meat-based scraps in the past, and as part of my collection, I did not accept them. I told all my customers that, like, small quantities, if you were scraping a plate off into the bucket and a little meat got in, that was okay. But because meat is much higher in nitrogen, it tends to smell more as it breaks down. And I did have some issues with flies and odors when I was composting meat scraps. So I phased that out and changed to a plant-based only pickup system. So all the vegetable scraps, fruit peels, pits, rinds. I did accept citrus, even though a lot of people say citrus is no good for worms. I found that if you buffer it out with other scraps in more of a balanced ratio, the worms handle citrus just fine. I did also accept things like paper-based scraps, paper towels, tissues, napkins, cardboard, office paper, that kind of stuff. And I mostly used the paper-based scraps as a bedding for the worms.
So when people put paper, like if you put a whole paper in there versus a shredded paper, does it make a difference, do you think?
Absolutely. The shredded paper works much better to create a system that has some good airflow to it, that traps moisture a little bit better. Just a flat piece of paper, especially once it gets wet, tends to get compacted or stick onto the sides of things, and it doesn't make as good as a habitat for the worms to live in. So I highly recommend, whether you're hand shredding or using a shredder, to shred that material up for your worm system and not put it in whole, with the exception of corrugated cardboard. Corrugated cardboard, you can just layer on top of itself, and because of that corrugation, there is some good airflow to it, and the worms really, really like hiding in those little corrugation seams in between the pieces of cardboard.
Great, great. So you got this system here, you got all these buckets here. Does each bucket represent a client, or how many clients, or what scale are we talking about that you did this for?
So before I stopped last month, I had about 110 customers that I was collecting from. I had downsized a little bit to deal with all of the waste myself. Last year and years before, I had help, employees or volunteers that would help do the compost every week with me. This past year, it's just been my partner and I doing everything on our own, driving the routes, washing the buckets, doing all the compost, feeding and managing the worms, and it just became too much. But each of these 5-gallon buckets belonged to a customer, and I did a bucket swap where they would put their bucket out for me on their pickup day, and I would take the whole bucket and leave them a clean, empty one to fill back up. Each bucket held about 2 weeks worth of their organic waste. I would collect every other week. I had a few clients that needed 2 buckets, but I found the average family would fill up about half a bucket every 2 weeks. The statistics on food waste are the average person in America throws away 1 pound of food waste a day. So I found that by allowing some more things than just food waste, my average bucket weight was about 25 pounds, meaning it was about 12 pounds of food waste per week instead of the 7, which is the national average.
Well, food waste is such a bad name because none of this is going to waste. You're reusing it.
It was all a valuable resource. It was feedstock for my livestock.
Exactly. No, I find that very interesting because I could fill up a bucket with scraps, and especially if I'm including paper, in a couple of days. let alone 2 weeks.
Yeah, I had some people that were superstar zero wasters, and they filled up 2 5-gallon buckets and then some in between pickups. But I would say that your average American might not be as on top of their routine as someone like me or you. So about half a bucket to maybe 3/4 of a bucket every other week was about what I could expect.
Now, did you charge per bucket, or how does it work? Or
I charged $16 a month, so it was essentially $8 a pickup. It was under like it was under $200 a year to subscribe to the pickups. I think my 1-year subscription was like 180 something and change, and my half a year subscription was $96 and change. And then most of my clients just had an automatic charge through PayPal once a month for their monthly collection fee.
And now, through you getting the bucket, did you return back to them the compost?
So because I only made worm castings, I was only making about 1 to 3 of these 5-gallon buckets a month worth of soil. And I needed the soil sales to help subsidize the cost of the route. So I didn't offer anything for free to my customers, but I offered free delivery and a discount on anything my customers wanted. The first year I did pickups, I did offer soil back to every single one of my customers, and I found that half of them just threw it into the bucket and returned it to me. So I decided not to offer the soil give back anymore, just because it's a tremendous amount of work for a very small payoff, and the castings are so valuable. I end up using most of them to make worm tea, which is an ultra concentrated extraction of the worm castings. It has very fast results when you apply it onto your plants, and I make a fresh batch of it every week to sell out of Caribbean Plants and Produce every weekend. So I needed most of the castings for what I was doing on the gardening side of my job, and decided not to share them with my pickup customers, only because many of them were like apartment dwellers or townhome dwellers and really didn't have a need for soil.
So the main purpose of the business was for the customers to help them with their zero waste ambitions.
Exactly. Yeah, I specifically created the pickup service for people who were trying to get to zero waste. That's why I accepted things like paper products, and I was always available to answer questions about what may be compostable by text or phone call to all of my customers to help them recycle as much as possible.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so what happened to your business? Because I know you're taking a pause from your business. To explain to everyone the problems you ran into.
So in April of last year, I got served with the first of many cease and desist orders from the Solid Waste Authority of Palm Beach County. And they claimed that they own all the trash in Palm Beach County, and I was stealing from them by offering my service.
Wow, that's crazy.
So we have a special solid waste plan here in Palm Beach County. The same year I started my business, we funded a waste-to-energy facility where we burn organic waste to generate energy. And through a partnership with FPL, the Solid Waste Authority can power, I believe it's 88,000 homes in Palm Beach County annually with the power they generate. But they claimed that by offering my composting service, I could impact the waste-to-energy facility's ability to do that, and that I had to stop.
So by collecting a bucket every 2 weeks from your customers, and you had 100 customers, let's say, they told you that's stealing their trash and their energy.
Yes.
And I would think a lot of cities would welcome this.
It's a beautiful blossoming industry called community composting. There's a great community composters forum hosted by the Institute for Local Self-Reliance and the United States Composting Council, where hundreds of businesses from across the nation, just like mine, all work together to help serve each other whatever ways they can. And unfortunately, Palm Beach County is the only county in the state of Florida that has this special solid waste integral plan that determines all of the organic waste must go to the waste to energy facility, and kind of prohibits any sort of ventures like mine from happening. I talked to the SWA about trying to obtain an exemption or a permit to operate, and they said that they do not grant organic waste recycling permits to anybody because of the waste to energy facilities. It's just not an industry they're interested in allowing to occur in Palm Beach County.
Wow, it's just crazy. So what did they tell you? How'd they make you stop? What did you say to them when they told you that? Were you continuing it? Like what exactly happened?
So when they first contacted me, I tried to explain to them that the way they regulate waste and the way that I collect food scraps they don't overlap. That what I'm doing is collecting feedstock for my livestock. I'm a farmer and I have domestic livestock. And they said that it didn't matter. I was transporting food waste without a permit and it was in violation of the laws here. When I stopped responding to them, after they made multiple requests to come inspect my property, after threatening me with fines of $500 a day every day I kept operating, they started going to all the listed addresses that I had ever registered the business to. They went to the listed business partners I had on my website and served them with cease and desist orders as well. They told them they had to stop working with me immediately or they would be subject to fines of $500 a day every day they kept operating, and they were accused of operating illegal transfer systems. And at that point, I kind of took the operation underground. I registered the business to a P.O. box. When I moved out here and I started doing all my composting out here, I applied to get my agriculture classification, and unfortunately, for whatever reason, didn't pass my ag inspection. And after I didn't pass my ag inspection, I kind of decided I didn't really have any more ground to stand on hiding the operation from them, and went ahead and shut everything down.
Well, I know of a wonderful zero waste company that doesn't necessarily transport the waste, which is the reason or excuse they gave you, but to helping people to produce less waste.
Yeah.
So under this same type of regulatory, they can come after somebody like that probably and say, well, you're stealing our waste. In a way, it's not directly, but...
They said that I could work with people to help them establish composting programs on their own property, but the second that I get someone else's compostable scraps onto a different property is where I'm violating the law. So backyard composting and composting of your own waste is 100% allowed in Palm Beach County, although it is subject to code regulation. But starting any sort of composting program where there is like a share waste side of it is what ends up getting you in trouble.
Now, is that from a business standpoint or personal or both? So if you come to my house and you teach me how to compost, and I have 5 buckets of compost, and I only need 4, and I give you one on a personal level without business, do you think you still fall under that category, or is it anyone you're transporting garbage anywhere, they're going to come after you?
I would say that in that situation, I would still get in trouble if I was caught, because the way the law reads is, like, if I were to own an apartment complex and ask all the people in my apartment complex to compost in my compost pile there on the property, that isn't allowed as per the way the law is written. So I would imagine that any type of sharing waste would be frowned upon or considered illegal based on the way they applied the law to me.
Have you contacted any lawyers or what have you tried to do? Did you just stop doing your business, or did you try to fight it, or where are you at with that now?
So I spent about a year trying to get some legal help. I had a lawyer who was helping me interpret all the paperwork they were sending to me, but didn't want to necessarily represent me pro bono in a fight against the county. I've applied for help through Earth Justice and the Institute for Justice to see if they could help support me and find a way to bring composting to Palm Beach County. I started a petition on change.org. I have over 1,000 signatures now, and I'm going to put that together with a new proposal that I've been working on for a municipal partnership and community composting program where I could work with a local city and maybe get some protection from that city or township from the county itself. And I've been asking people to write me letters and send them to me expressing their disappointment in the Solid Waste Authority for shutting me down. So I can put those all together in a nice press kit and info packet and send it off to some state legislators, senators, mayors, county board of commissioners, anybody who has tried to help me or has given me a hard time about this, just to show them that I'm the real deal and this could be a viable municipal service if the county just gave it a chance.
So this is just Palm Beach County. If you lived in another county, Miami or Boynton Beach or something, you probably wouldn't have this issue, right?
Yeah, actually Broward County, just south of us, Deerfield Beach has a municipal program they launched this year. They got a grant through the Food Waste Reduction Act, and they're offering free compost pickup to the first 100 people who sign up in Deerfield Beach. There's 2 companies, one called Filthy Organics and one called Live Renewable, that operate out of Broward County, and they do the same exact thing that I do. And now Broward County is trying to fund a waste-to-energy facility, and they're looking at adopting the same laws Palm Beach County has, and there's a big rush to protest the waste-to-energy facility down in Broward.
Well, can you get a P.O. box in a county that allows this, or is it more complicated than that?
My biggest issue is to work on my own property. I'm in unincorporated Palm Beach County, so I fall under jurisdiction of the county, and they could give me a lot of problems about running the business here, even if I was doing my collection in like Martin County or Broward. So I had been hoping to get recognized as a bona fide farm and get some protection from the Right to Farm Act. A year of being recognized as a legitimate farm means that they can't tell you how to change your farming operation in order for you to continue working. But unfortunately, they surprise inspected me one day when I wasn't home, and I don't think realized I had thousands of worms in the worm barn. And they told me that my property was too residential, and they did not allow me to be recognized as an agriculture entity. So after that happened, I decided to preemptively shut down the business before SWA or code enforcement found me and started giving me a hard time.
Well, I'm a big composter, and this is why I'm out here, is to help you. If anyone sees this video and knows somebody, a lawyer, or a way that can help Melissa out with her business, I'm going to put her website and also the information below the video. If anyone has suggestions or anyone knows a lawyer that might be able to help her, that's why I'm here. I want to bring attention to this. So any links that you have for signing a petition or anything else, do you have a GoFundMe page at all?
I have a GoFundMe, I have a change.org petition, and then I have my website where I have been kind of keeping people updated, and I do have links to the GoFundMe and petition as well. And then I'm still on Facebook and Instagram. I'm at Wormy Queen on Instagram, and I'm let_it_rot on Facebook.
All right, I'm going to put all those links below the video. Now, what is it? How do you work with a public store? Does that change things, or is it the same situation if you want to get the public store's waste? Is it still changing anything, or no?
So all I did differently when it came to small businesses that I worked with was I offered a weekly pickup subscription of 6 buckets or more. And that started at about $50 a month. So it was still the same 5-gallon buckets, and the store I worked with had to have the ability to store those 5-gallon buckets. But I worked with a juice bar and a coffee shop. I worked with Modern Juice Company in Jupiter, I Need Coffee in Jupiter, El Sol Community Center in Jupiter, and then Driftwood Restaurant in Boynton Beach.
Yeah, coffee grinds, by the way, are great for compost, everybody. They're wonderful.
Oh, so rich in nitrogen, and you can actually just use them straight up as a soil amendment. You don't even have to compost them to use them. So
with the store, let's say a local farmer's market or even any type of store, coffee store, if people bring their waste to the store and then you pick them up. Is it the store's responsibility that's taking the waste away from them, or is it yourself that's still considered taking the waste?
Yeah, I had 2 stores that were offering something like that, and they both got served cease and desist orders also.
Wow.
So it was just the collection of the scraps itself. Palm Beach County wanted them for their incinerator. They did not want me to have them.
Wow. Well, show us around your property here of what you got going on your personal level here.
Sure.
And, you know, I know you don't have worms here right now, but just you have some trees, so show us around if you want.
All right. I have one worm bin with some baby worms in it if you want to see that.
Sure.
So this was my worm barn. Every single one of these trays at one point had about 500 worms in it. And it looks like, you can see I have the cardboard layered together with shredded paper in here. And then here are some, I let this system dry out, but I just started watering it again and some baby worms hatched.
Okay, so when you say you let it dry out, so when your business was going, you would water the pile every now and then?
Yes, I had to water these guys, I would say, like maybe twice a week to keep the hydration proper and keep the worms happy, allow the breakdown process to keep happening at the rate the worms could keep up with. I went out of town for about a week and wasn't watering the worm systems, and they just got too dry, and the worms either dried up or migrated out of here. However, worm cocoons are incredibly resilient, and they can go dormant for up to like 5 years. So all of the unhatched worm cocoons can lay dormant for about 5 years. And when I let these bins dry out, the worm cocoons dried out with them. When I started watering and caring for them again, the cocoons hatched and I got some new baby worms. So even though I had a really bad die-off, I do still have some population in my worm systems.
Okay. All right. Wow, you got a whole system here of all of these. And what a shame. Hopefully one of the viewers knows some way that you can be helped with their business here. So show us around your trees here. How much land do you have on this property?
So we have 1.25 acres.
An acre and a quarter. Wow. And everybody, we're in Loxahatchee, Florida. A lot of the places I visit are in this area.
So this is the butterfly garden in the back. It's mostly flowering plants and ornamentals, but all of the garden beds were built using those same composting techniques, the trench composting, laying the materials out. The butterflies are really showing off today too. So I have a combination of host plants and food plants in here. Host plants are what the caterpillars need to eat in order to become butterflies. And food plants are sources of nectar for all the pollinators. And then just some plain ornamentals to make it look pretty. And everywhere throughout the property, we do have food plants mixed in. Like there's a cranberry hibiscus. This one's called sea salad hibiscus. We've got this beautiful papaya tree filled with papayas. I check them every morning, waiting till I get to eat them. This is I believe, pomelo tree. And it is actually meant to be a host plant for the bird poop caterpillar, which is the swallowtail butterfly, which is why we put this one in the butterfly garden. But I do have a little fruit tree grove up front where we planted a bunch of seedlings. We've got a chaya hedge that we're working on this side of the property. And we've literally just been taking cuttings off the one plant on the far right and then planting them down the fence as we go to build that hedge. There's banana trees all around the outskirts of the properties because bananas really like water, and those are the lowest spots on the property. I've got my first rack of bananas coming in behind the barn. I'm really excited about it.
Do you know what type of bananas they are?
The ones I have coming in are dwarf Cavendish. I only have I think dwarf Cavendish and giant plantains.
Okay.
I don't have any of the fun varieties of bananas, but I'm hoping to start collecting those this year. So this is the fruit tree grove. We do have a poinciana tree in the middle of it as a memoriam to my mom. But we have avocado. I don't know which variety this is. It was here on the property when we moved in. It was one of 3 trees that we had on the property when I moved in last year.
Do you water these, or you have water on them?
I have some irrigation that hits this area, but I don't come out here on a daily basis and water them. Everything's kind of left to fend for itself. What I do have is a worm tea well where I make worm tea on a constant basis. And I come out here about once a week and I water everything with the worm tea. We've got ice cream bean. We've got Catley guava, which gave us some guavas this year, and I have to say better than any pink or white guava I've ever had. This is a little pomelo I grew from seed. A little baby Spanish lime. Our hog plum tree is blowing up this year. This is my favorite, the variegated kumquat. And believe it or not, it seems to be pretty resistant to a lot of citrus diseases. This is the second flush of fruit that it's given us in 6 months that it's been in the ground.
The skin's edible on those, right?
Yes, they're very sour.
Yeah.
Very, very sour. I don't know. I have a pink lemon, which is not doing as well. This is a custard apple we're very excited about. This is a black sapote that we started from seed. And then we actually have 2 neem trees that we planted as sort of natural pest control. This one's not so big, but the other one has turned out to be the tallest tree on the property. Barbados cherry, and then tons of cranberry hibiscus and hibiscus cannabis throughout the whole property.
Do you have any plans with the empty area there? This whole empty area, you have a whole empty area.
We haven't figured out what we want to do with it. We've considered building a patio, but we want to plant more trees.
Sure.
So we haven't really decided what the best way to go is.
Okay. Wow, this is really an impressive yard here.
This is a little butterfly garden and pond area that we built using all recycled materials. We went to dig a hole to plant a tree in the back, and we found a giant pit of terracotta roof tiles. So we're assuming there was a pond on the property that got filled in, but we decided to build a pond and use those terracotta roof tiles to make it. And this is all butterfly plants and flowering plants too. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm more of a flowers girl than an edibles girl. So here's my ylang ylang tree. We've got some pomegranates that we started from seed. More cranberry hibiscus. Joyweed, which is also edible. Kind of bitter, not as good as the cranberry hibiscus.
Is that shampoo ginger?
This is shrimp plant.
Okay.
It flowers year round. It always has flowers on it. It's the most expensive variety of Justica you can buy. And these are also some more pomegranates that we started from seed.
Very nice. Very nice. You got a lot of stuff here. And what do you do with the flowers?
So my goal was to always have butterflies on the property. And I think I've done a pretty good job at accomplishing that. We usually see at least some yellow sulfurs or zebra longwings or polydamas swallowtails. I will grow flowers and cut them and sell them at the market occasionally, but mostly flowers make me happy.
Great, great. And how do your neighbors feel? Do they know what you do, and how do they feel about everything?
So my neighbors behind us have seen us do the compost quite a few times. and their chickens help turn my compost because their chickens all free range constantly. And they're okay with it. They were a little put off the first time they saw a big pile of rotten food in the back, but them and their children learned to really enjoy it and would come running over to me and ask me how the compost was that day. The rest of my neighbors, I've tried to respect them and avoid doing the compost right under their nose or in front of their face. A lot of people tend to smell with their eyes. So by doing compost when no one's around, it's a lot easier to get it all applied, finished, and set up proper without accumulating any kinds of complaints or issues from the neighbors. Because I don't work with meat-based scraps, my compost really doesn't have an odor to it, and because I don't turn the pile, I don't release a lot of odors into the air. So I've managed to compost 1,000 pounds of food a week every week for this entire year without anyone really noticing.
Does it attract more flies than normally or anything like that?
So I would say in the heat of the summer, I tend to have some fly issues. I will inoculate my beds or my compost with BT to try to control the flies if it does become a problem.
What's BT?
I forget the scientific name of it, but it's a microbe that helps sterilize the fly larva so it can't turn into a fly. Yeah, it's just a microbe that you can add to help sterilize the flies so they don't continue to become a big problem.
Okay. All right. Well, that's amazing, everything you got growing on here. Now, what about the chickens? Wouldn't they be bad for you? Because I knew because they would eat all the worms, right?
Yeah, that's why my worms were kept in the barn, to keep them away from the chickens and birds. For sure, the chickens love to come out and scratch through the compost pile and forage for any maggots or worms or even scraps that they find in there, which does help aerate the compost and turn the pile. It can be a little aggravating to constantly have to clean up after the chickens and to have to add more worms to the piles because the chickens keep dwindling my populations. But at the same time, I got into this because I agreed with natural farming practices, and allowing the chickens to work the compost pile over just makes a better product in my opinion.
Got you. Okay, great. All right, everybody, there it was. That's the information. Please go to the links below and help Melissa out with her situation. If any of you out there are a lawyer or no lawyer that can help her, or her GoFundMe page where you can help her raise some funds to fight this crazy law, please help Melissa out. Melissa, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right, everybody, check her website out. The link is below, and tell them, everybody, the website.
LetItRot.org.
All right.
Google the Worm Queen and you'll find me.
All right, everybody, that was such an important issue to me, and I think anyone that's serious about growing, whether it's garden or fruit trees, that should be an important issue for you. You would almost laugh if you've come to my house and see how much garbage I have compared to the average person. I mean, and how much I reuse. Melissa said in the video that one of those buckets, those 5-gallon gallons, might be something every week she might go and pick up from people, or every 2 weeks. I'm using like a bucket like that every 2 days, between going to the bathroom with my poop, my urine, and also the food scraps. For me and my family, those things fill up quickly, and I get to reuse them. Bananas love all of that recycled matter, and I just love putting them on bananas. I don't, as I was saying, like as much nitrogen on my full-grown, mature mango trees, but they're okay for baby trees. But so much great information. Please help her out with her dilemma and her situation. The link is below. And thank you, Melissa, for you and your company and what you're trying to do and the example you're setting. And I love the idea of having as little waste as possible and reusing as much as possible. So everybody, put your comments or questions below about this video. And she also had some cool trees. Well, that was cool. And I like the little pond she put there. That was great. But I wanted to get this video, and I'm glad we did. And I'd love to know your comments and questions about this topic. I'll do more videos on composting in the future and show you how I compost in my house and what I do. But until then, everybody, thank you for watching. If you have a local area where you're growing trees or have topics like this and you'd like me to come out and film, just contact me. My email's below. And if you have questions you'd like me to answer about growing fruit trees or compost or anything like that, post them below as well. Until then, everybody, have a great day and keep growing.